She called 911 accusing him of stealing, but the truth left everyone speechless. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the suburban neighborhood. Rows of neatly lined houses stretched down quiet streets, each lawn perfectly manicured, the grass freshly mowed and still glistening with morning dew. Driveways were spotless, adorned with sparkling vehicles and colorful flower pots, the pride of homeowners eager to maintain appearances. Children laughed and squealed as they rode bikes along the sidewalks, their small feet pedaling furiously while sprinklers danced in the sun, sending arcs of crystal-clear water that shimmered like diamonds. The air carried a faint scent of cut grass mixed with the warmth of asphalt heated by the afternoon sun. Signs of the Homeowners Association's presence were evident everywhere. Rules were posted on fences and bulletin boards, guidelines for landscaping, parking, noise, and even the colors of permissible mailboxes. It was a community where order and perfection were prized, where appearances mattered above all else. At a glance, everything seemed serene, flawless, and peaceful. Yet, beneath the polished exterior, there was a subtle tension lingering in the air, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. Birds flitted from one oak tree to another, their chirps punctuating the faint hum of distant lawnmowers. The occasional dog barked somewhere beyond a white picket fence, while a gentle breeze carried the faint scent of blooming roses from a nearby garden. The quiet street seemed almost too perfect, too orderly, like a painting where every element was meticulously placed. Neighbors exchanged polite nods as they passed each other, smiles carefully measured, conversations kept brief and unobtrusive. The culture here was one of scrutiny and judgment, of measuring one's worth by the neatness of a driveway or the shine on a freshly washed car. Amidst this facade of tranquility, a sense of anticipation seemed to ripple subtly through the air. It was the kind of tension that lingered in the shadows of freshly trimmed hedges and behind the closed curtains of perfectly kept homes. Something was about to disrupt this carefully curated order, though no one could quite predict the form it would take. The neighborhood, with all its rules and rigid structures, seemed unaware of the storm quietly approaching, a disruption that would challenge assumptions, test patience, and reveal the fragile undercurrent of judgment hidden beneath polite smiles. Afternoon light stretched long shadows across the sidewalks and driveways, emphasizing the contrast between the polished surface of the neighborhood and the unpredictable reality just beneath it. The sprinklers continued to glisten, the children's laughter rang clear, and the hum of suburban life continued, yet an unspoken question lingered. What happens when someone challenges the illusion of perfection, when a moment of misunderstanding threatens to unravel the carefully constructed order? In this sun-drenched neighborhood, every detail mattered, every lawn, every mailbox, every smile, but for the first time, the air itself seemed to hint that appearances could deceive. Behind closed doors, people went about their routines, unaware that the calm of the afternoon was only the surface layer. Soon, the stillness would be pierced by voices, misunderstandings, and a clash that would bring the community face to face with truth, fairness, and the fragility of assumptions. In the midst of the sunlit suburban calm, one house stood with a subtle sense of distinction, not because of grandeur or extravagant landscaping, but because of the man who lived there. He was a black man in his late 30s, perhaps early 40s, with a presence that drew attention not through loudness, but through the quiet authority he carried in every measured movement. His build was solid and purposeful, the kind of strength that spoke of hands accustomed to labor and dedication, yet paired with the attentiveness of someone who noticed the smallest details. His eyes, dark and steady, seemed to take in the world. With an almost surgical precision, noting patterns, observing behaviors, and silently cataloging what others might miss. There was a calm confidence about him, a sense that he belonged exactly where he was, regardless of whether others recognized it. His garage was his sanctuary. Beyond the neatly trimmed lawn and tidy driveway, a large, Metal door opened into a space filled with tools, automotive parts, and the subtle aroma of motor oil mixed with the faint scent of sawdust. Inside, a car in mid-restoration sat on a lift, wires coiled neatly, and shelves lined with labeled boxes of parts stretched along the walls. It was more than a garage, it was a haven of skill and passion, a private universe where he could shape, repair, and create without judgment or interference. The hum of an overhead fan stirred the air slightly, and sunlight streaming through a high window illuminated the dust particles like tiny floating stars, giving the space a sacred glow. Neighbors who knew him often spoke quietly of his skill and kindness. He had helped many of them repair a car, fix a fence, or troubleshoot a stubborn lawnmower without asking for anything in return. Children waved at him as he worked outside, and a few elderly neighbors occasionally paused to offer a nod of appreciation. Yet, despite these acts, some still carried the bias of assumption. To them, he was the quiet black man in the neighborhood, the one whose presence could be misconstrued simply because of old prejudices, stereotypes, or ignorance. It was a tension he lived with daily, navigating civility and respect while others often made judgments before knowing the facts. On this particular afternoon, he moved methodically, checking a tool, adjusting a car jack, and wiping his hands on a clean rag. Each motion was deliberate, calm, and unhurried, reflecting the internal order he cultivated amid the chaos of a world that sometimes misread him. The sun warmed his back, highlighting the contours of his strong shoulders and the subtle sheen of sweat that spoke of genuine effort. He paused to step outside briefly, scanning the street with that same attentive gaze, noting children playing, sprinklers arching water across the driveways, and the occasional HOA sign reminding everyone of the rules. He understood the rhythms of his neighborhood, the sounds, the movements, the social currents, but he was not swayed by them. In his demeanor, there was a quiet statement. This space, this garage, this home, was his domain, not because of confrontation, but because of respect earned through patience, diligence, and skill. He embodied a paradox: approachable yet unassailable, kind yet firm, ordinary yet exceptional. For some neighbors he was a model citizen. For others, a source of unfounded suspicion. But in his own eyes, the world outside his garage could shift, misjudge, or misunderstand all it wanted. Within this small sanctuary, he was certain of one truth: his work, his craft, and his character were beyond the reach of baseless accusations. And as the bright afternoon sunlight bathed his garage and the quiet street beyond, the calm before, the inevitable storm settled over him, a subtle tension that neither he nor the neighborhood could yet name. The stage was set, and he was ready not with anger, but with steady, unshakable presence. The afternoon sun was warm, spilling golden light across the suburban street, when the day took an unexpected turn. The man, calm and methodical, had just rolled open his garage door, the familiar creak echoing softly in the quiet neighborhood. Inside, the familiar scent of motor oil and rubber greeted him as he moved toward his car, hands steady and precise. It was a routine he had performed countless times, a private ritual of focus and care. He had no reason to suspect that this ordinary moment would ignite a chain of chaos. Across the driveway, the new HOA resident, a woman in her 40s with an air of entitlement and impatience, spotted him near the gleaming car she had just purchased. Her eyes narrowed and her lips tightened as an immediate assumption took hold. The man's calm presence, his proximity to her new vehicle, became in her mind proof of wrongdoing. Without hesitation, she opened her mouth and let her panic and outrage pour forth. Her voice, sharp and loud, cut through the neighborhood's usual tranquility, accusing him of theft. "Hey! That's my car! Get away from it! Call the police!" she screamed, gesturing wildly and drawing the attention of neighbors who had been enjoying the warm afternoon. Children stopped mid-laugh, Sprinklers continued to hiss, and the calm Suburban rhythm seemed to fracture in an instant. Some neighbors froze on their porches, unsure of what to do, while others peeked cautiously. Sensing the unfolding drama, the man paused, raised his hand slightly, and spoke in measured, calm tones. "Ma'am, that's your car. Yes, but I haven't touched it. I'm working on my own vehicle inside the garage." His voice was steady, unshaken, but carried a hint of incredulity at the accusation. There was no defensiveness in his posture, no rush to react with anger, only composed clarity. Neighbors began to murmur, divided between belief and skepticism. A few, who knew him, understood immediately that her accusation was unfounded, while others, influenced by her shouting and urgency, hesitated, unsure of whom to trust. The tension stretched, palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap. Then came the distant wail of sirens. Police cars arrived, lights flashing, breaking the golden calm of the afternoon with urgent urgency. Officers stepped carefully onto the driveway, notebooks in hand, assessing the situation. The woman pointed at him again, insisting she had seen him near her car just moments ago. "He stole it. I just bought it yesterday," she cried, her tone a mix of fear, indignation, and outrage. The man remained still, his movements deliberate, showing nothing but composure. "You drove it yourself earlier," he said quietly, gesturing toward the vehicle, "and then parked it here. I've been working on my own car this whole time. Please check the cameras." His calmness contrasted sharply with her frantic energy, making the officers pause, considering both sides carefully. Slowly, small clues began to emerge. A neighbor peeked from behind a tree and whispered confirmation of seeing her drive the car that morning. The faint hum of the garage camera recording signaled a silent witness to the truth. Even as the woman's voice continued to pierce the afternoon, the seeds of doubt had been planted. The sun glinted off the car's polished surface, the shadows stretching long across the driveway, highlighting the quiet man standing near his sanctuary, composed, dignified, and completely aware of the imbalance in perception. The stage had been set for a confrontation that would not be won with shouts or assumptions, but with patience, observation, and undeniable truth. In that suburban driveway, under the bright afternoon light, a clash of perception, prejudice, and reality had begun, and the calm black man at the center was ready to let the evidence, not anger, speak for him. As the sirens faded into the suburban afternoon, the tension on the quiet street only thickened. Neighbors gathered cautiously, peeking from behind trimmed hedges and curtains, whispering among themselves. The sudden commotion had shattered the polished calm of the neighborhood, and curiosity mingled with judgment. Some faces reflected concern, others suspicion, and a few carried a subtle, unspoken prejudice. It was as if the sunny afternoon had shifted into a stage, with the black man at the center unwittingly cast into a role he had never sought. The man remained composed, standing near his garage, his posture calm yet alert. Deep brown skin glistened faintly under the warm sun, hands still faintly smeared with grease from his work, but his expression betrayed nothing but patience. His attentive eyes scanned the crowd, noting every gesture, every shifting glance, every murmured comment. He understood the unspoken dynamics at play. People often judged before they saw, assumed before they knew, and reacted before they reflected. Meanwhile, the woman, her voice now cracking with frustration, repeated her accusations, pointing at the car as if her gestures could magically enforce her version of reality. "He stole it. I just bought it yesterday," she cried again, her words echoing down the quiet street. The officers on the scene listened carefully, jotting down notes, their faces neutral but cautious. They had seen enough suburban disputes to know that truth often hid beneath layers of confusion, ego, and miscommunication. Slowly, the first clues began to surface. A neighbor who had been walking her dog approached quietly, glancing at the officers before speaking. "I saw her drive that car this morning, And she parked it here herself, she said, her voice low but firm. Another neighbor nodded in agreement, recalling the precise moment they had seen the shiny vehicle being driven down the street earlier. Each small revelation chipped away at the woman's certainty, creating cracks in the narrative she had built with her voice and volume. Inside his garage, the faint hum of the security camera was an invisible witness to the truth. It had captured the man working steadily on his own car, oblivious to the accusations outside. The timestamp proved his innocence, showing the meticulous sequence of actions that contradicted her claims. Though unseen by most onlookers, the camera's silent testimony added weight to the growing tension, a quiet counterpoint to the woman's frantic accusations. The neighborhood atmosphere became a mix of murmurs, shifting glances, and whispered speculation. Children paused mid-play, unsure whether to continue or retreat. Sprinklers still arched water across the sidewalks, catching the sunlight and throwing tiny rainbows into the air, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. Even the officers exchanged subtle glances, their pens poised over notebooks, waiting for a factual basis to untangle the chaos. Through it all, the man maintained his calm. There was no anger in his tone, no defensive gestures, no rush to dominate the scene. His quiet confidence served as a stark contrast to the woman's escalating panic, highlighting the difference between assumption-driven chaos and evidence-based composure. Each second that passed made it more evident that truth was on his side. Though the public acknowledgement had yet to occur, the tension stretched long into the afternoon, with every new murmur, every tentative glance, and every subtle confirmation from witnesses building suspense. It was a delicate balance between chaos and order, accusation and evidence, perception and reality. And standing at the center, the man seemed almost untouchable, a figure of quiet strength and integrity amidst the whirlwind of misunderstanding. His presence a steady anchor against the storm of assumptions, threatening to overwhelm the neighborhood. The neighborhood had settled into a tense hush as police officers began to investigate, their movements deliberate and professional. The initial chaos of shouting and accusations had faded, replaced by the quiet, methodical hum of evidence gathering. The black man stood near his garage, calm and observant, hands tucked loosely into his pockets, eyes flicking to every movement of the officers and neighbors. His posture radiated patience and quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the still flustered woman, whose hands trembled slightly as she clutched her phone and repeated her story. Officers crouched near the driveway, reviewing the timestamps on his security cameras, the subtle clicks of buttons and the low hum of the monitor breaking the silence. Frames of footage showed him meticulously working on his own car, adjusting the jack, wiping grease from his hands, and never once touching the woman's vehicle. The sequence of actions was clear, undeniable, a meticulous record of innocence. Each frame became a silent witness to his truth, silently countering the chaos that had erupted earlier. Neighbors leaned over fences or peeked from behind curtains, their murmurs blending into a low, suspenseful hum. Some whispered in disbelief, struggling to reconcile what they had seen with the woman's frantic claims. Others, who knew the man's reputation for skill and integrity, quietly nodded, their expressions confirming what the footage would soon prove. Every observation, every whispered confirmation, acted as a subtle piece of the puzzle, gradually dismantling the false narrative. A neighbor stepped forward, speaking directly to one of the officers. "I saw her drive the car earlier this morning," they said, voice steady but firm. "She parked it right here. He hasn't touched it." Another resident, who had been walking their dog along the sidewalk, added, "He's always in his garage around this time. I watched him today. He's never near anyone else's car." These small, seemingly ordinary statements carried the weight of truth, quietly reinforcing the evidence captured on camera. The woman's frustration grew as each new piece of information undermined her claims. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, faltered slightly, her confident facade cracking under the mounting proof against her story. Her gestures became exaggerated, almost desperate, as she tried to assert control over a situation steadily slipping from her grasp. The officers exchanged glances, sensing that the balance of credibility was shifting. As the investigation continued, subtle clues from the environment added further weight. Tire tracks in the driveway matched the timing of her morning drive. Not his. The position of the sprinklers, still sending arcs of water across the lawns, reflected the time of day when he had been focused inside the garage. Even the faint reflection in a neighbor's window captured the vehicle's movements, corroborating the sequence of events. Each detail, unnoticed by many at first, combined into a mosaic that told a story starkly different from her shouted accusations. Through it all, the man's demeanor never wavered. He observed quietly, offering no unnecessary explanations, letting the evidence speak for itself. His calm patience contrasted with the woman's growing agitation, emphasizing a truth that could not be silenced or overshadowed by panic. The suspense in the neighborhood stretched taut like a string, the quiet moments between revelations brimming with anticipation. Everyone watching began to sense the inevitable. The truth was about to emerge, and when it did, the reality of the situation would be undeniable. In that sunlit suburban street, with children playing and sprinklers sparkling like scattered diamonds, the stage was set. Assumptions, prejudice, and chaos were being quietly dismantled, piece by piece, by evidence, observation, and calm integrity. And at the center of it all stood the man, steady, patient, and ready for the vindication that would soon arrive. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, warm shadows across the suburban street when the unexpected twist unfolded. For hours, the neighborhood had been caught in a whirlwind of confusion, assumptions, and accusations. The black man had remained calm, his presence steady and unwavering, while the woman's frantic voice had filled the air, growing more desperate as evidence mounted against her. What had begun as a simple misunderstanding had escalated into a tense standoff. With neighbors and police watching every motion. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. A young neighbor, who had observed the morning's events from her porch, quietly pointed to the garage camera monitor inside the man's driveway. "Look," she said softly, motioning to the time-stamped footage. "He's never near her car. He's been working on his own car the entire time." A few others leaned closer, murmuring in recognition of the truth they had begun to suspect. The realization rippled outward, quietly at first, then gaining momentum. The woman's confident demeanor began to crumble. She had assumed her loud proclamations and her position as the newest, wealthier resident would secure belief, but the evidence told a different story. Each frame from the garage camera, each neighbor testimony, and even the subtle environmental clues, the tire tracks, the timing of sprinklers, the reflection in windows, worked in concert to dismantle her narrative. Her hands trembled slightly, her voice faltering, and a flush of embarrassment crept up her neck as the truth became undeniable. Then came the twist that no one had expected. The HOA representative, who had initially remained silent, stepped forward, holding a folder of neighborhood logs and security footage from multiple homes. "It appears," they announced, "that the accusations were unfounded. The resident here, calmly working in his garage, has been misjudged. Every piece of evidence confirms his innocence." A collective gasp echoed down the street, some neighbors whispering apologies under their breath, others staring in disbelief at the woman's unraveling story. The man, who had remained silent until this moment, finally spoke. His voice was steady, calm, and measured, carrying the weight of dignity and quiet strength. "For hours," he said, "people have assumed, judged, and accused without knowing the truth. This was my garage, my workspace, my sanctuary. And yet, a simple assumption nearly turned into a tragedy of character." His words, though soft, resonated powerfully. Drawing attention and reflection from everyone present, neighbors began to realize the full extent of what had happened. The woman's panic-driven assumptions, fueled by entitlement and a lack of understanding, had almost caused irreversible damage, not just to the man's reputation, but to the harmony of the entire neighborhood. The contrast between the man's composed patience and her frantic accusations highlighted a stark lesson in humility, perception, and the dangers of prejudice. By late afternoon, as the sun's rays warmed the street with a golden hue, the situation had fully shifted. The man had been vindicated, his reputation intact, and even strengthened by his composure. The woman, flustered and embarrassed, quietly retreated, confronted not by anger but by undeniable truth and the judgment of her own peers. The neighborhood, once buzzing with tension and speculation, settled into a reflective silence. It was a moment no one would forget, a sudden, unexpected twist that revealed the fragility of assumptions and the enduring power of patience, integrity, and calm observance. In the midst of a sunlit suburban street, truth had prevailed, and a quiet black man had reminded everyone that character and composure are far stronger than fear, bias, or volume. By the late afternoon, the suburban street had transformed from a scene of confusion into a stage of revelation. Neighbors lingered on their porches, leaning over fences and whispering among themselves. Children paused mid-play, sprinklers still, hissing, casting shimmering arcs of water in the golden light. The calm, sunlit neighborhood had become a witness to a confrontation that had exposed assumptions, bias, and the weight of evidence. The black man stood near his garage, hands folded, loosely at his sides, posture calm but commanding. Deep brown skin glowed under the fading sunlight, his face composed and steady, betraying none of the frustration he must have felt in the hours prior. Every eye in the neighborhood seemed to converge on him, some with admiration, others with a dawning realization of the injustice they had almost allowed to occur. He was no longer merely a man accused. He was the embodiment of patience, integrity, and quiet resilience. The woman, flushed and trembling, attempted once more to assert herself, but her words stumbled, lacking conviction. The mounting evidence, surveillance footage, neighbor testimonies, environmental cues had cornered her, leaving her public credibility in shreds. She waved her hands frantically, searching for an argument, a loophole, a shred of perceived authority, but none existed. The truth had taken the stage, and there was no room for her fabrication. Finally, in a moment that seemed to stretch the warm afternoon into eternity, the man spoke. His voice was calm, resonant, and measured, carrying an authority that transcended volume. For hours, assumptions were made, accusations were shouted, and reputations were threatened. Yet in all that noise, one thing remained clear: the truth does not depend on panic, it does not rely on fear, and it does not bend to volume or entitlement. My work, my space, my character, they exist independently of false claims. And today, that truth stands before you. Silence fell. It was thick and palpable, a collective pause as every resident absorbed the weight of his words. The children resumed their play, though quieter now, sprinklers reflecting the late sun like scattered diamonds, and the neighborhood seemed to exhale. The officers, once caught between two conflicting narratives, nodded in acknowledgement, their eyes reflecting recognition of the careful patience and undeniable evidence that had resolved the matter. Neighbors, who had earlier allowed whispers of suspicion to take root, now whispered apologies, offered nods of respect, and some even clapped softly in acknowledgement of the man's dignified handling of the entire ordeal. The HOA representative, previously neutral, stepped forward to formally close the investigation, confirming the man's innocence and acknowledging the misjudgment that had caused the unnecessary chaos. The woman, her anger replaced with embarrassment, retreated quietly, confronted not by hostility but by the undeniable clarity of facts. Her attempts at intimidation had failed spectacularly, replaced by a community-wide lesson in humility and fairness. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the driveway and street. In that quiet, golden light, the man remained composed, a figure of calm authority amid the remnants of tension. The neighborhood had witnessed more than a correction of a false accusation. It had seen patience, integrity, and quiet resilience triumph over panic, bias, and entitlement. In that moment, the man was not only vindicated, he had set an example of moral courage that would resonate far beyond the suburban street. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long golden shadows across the neighborhood, the atmosphere softened. The earlier tension that had gripped the quiet suburban street began to dissolve, replaced by a reflective calm. Children resumed their play, cautiously at first, then with renewed laughter that echoed against the houses. The sprinklers continued their rhythmic dance, sending arcs of sparkling water across the freshly mowed lawns, catching the fading light like tiny rainbows. It was a gentle reminder that life, even after disruption, continued its flow. The black man remained near his garage, hands resting lightly on the edge of his workspace, posture composed and unhurried. He watched the neighborhood breathe again, taking in the small gestures of reconciliation, neighbors nodding in quiet acknowledgement of his patience, subtle murmurs of apology, and the softened expressions of those who had earlier doubted him. His gaze was steady, his demeanor unshaken, yet beneath it lay a deep sense of satisfaction, not in triumph over another, but in the quiet vindication of truth, integrity, and resilience. The woman, whose earlier accusations had created chaos, had retreated, now confronted not with anger, but with the undeniable reality of her error. Her bluster had been replaced by a humbling silence, and in that, the neighborhood had witnessed a powerful lesson. Loudness and entitlement cannot overpower evidence, patience, or moral fortitude. As the sky shifted to soft pinks and oranges, painting the quiet street in warm hues, it became clear what had been proven that afternoon. True strength is not measured by volume, force, or aggression. Sometimes it is the quiet persistence of someone overlooked, the dignity of a person who remains steadfast when misunderstood, and the courage to allow truth to reveal itself. The man's composed patience had turned a moment of prejudice into a teaching moment, illuminating the difference between assumption and understanding. In the end, the neighborhood absorbed a moral far beyond the mere correction of a misunderstanding. They had witnessed how character, calm resolve, and ethical integrity could transform chaos into clarity. In that sunlit suburban street, as laughter and the gentle hiss of sprinklers filled the air once more, the lesson lingered. Justice and truth often arrive quietly, carried by those who remain steady when the world misjudges them. The man returned to his garage, closing the door with a sense of fulfillment. Leaving behind more than an afternoon resolved, he left a community enlightened, reminded that patience, composure, and integrity are the quiet yet unshakable pillars of true strength. As the afternoon light softened into a warm, golden glow, the quiet suburban street seemed to exhale, the tension of earlier hours dissipating like mist under the sun. The air carried the faint scent of cut grass and the lingering warmth of asphalt, mingling with the delicate perfume of blooming flowers along the sidewalks. Children's laughter returned, softer now but filled with renewed innocence, bouncing off the houses as sprinklers arched crystalline streams of water into the sunlight. It was a scene of ordinary life, yet beneath the familiar calm lay a deeper truth, a lesson etched into the hearts of everyone who had witnessed the day's events. The man, standing near his garage, observed the neighborhood with a composed, almost meditative gaze. His strong build and attentive eyes, which had earlier communicated quiet strength, now reflected a serene satisfaction. He had not raised his voice. He had not forced himself into confrontation. Instead, he had allowed patience, evidence, and moral integrity to speak on his behalf. In doing so, He had transformed what could have been a trivial misunderstanding into a powerful reminder of what true strength entails. Around him, neighbors began to murmur among themselves, their expressions a mixture of relief, respect, and reflection. Some nodded to one another, acknowledging that their own assumptions and snap judgments had fueled the conflict more than the man's actions ever could. The woman, whose loud accusations had sparked the chaos, had retreated quietly, leaving behind not anger or resentment, but a sobering reminder that entitlement and prejudice cannot substitute for truth. That it became evident that calmness and composure could diffuse tension in ways that shouting never could. The man's ability to remain steady, patient, and observant had prevented a confrontation from escalating further, preserving both his dignity and the neighborhood's harmony. Each neighbor who had doubted him now recognized that evidence, clarity, and integrity are far more powerful than fear, bias, or assumptions. The lesson was subtle, yet profound. Judgment without understanding only breeds chaos, whereas patience and moral courage cultivate respect. As the sun dipped lower, painting the houses in shades of amber and rose, the street seemed to embody the newfound understanding. Conversations shifted from gossip to reflection, from judgment to acknowledgement of character. Neighbors who had once whispered doubts now offered quiet apologies, gestures of humility that underscored the transformative power of truth. Children resumed their play with renewed energy, unaware yet subtly influenced by the harmony restored. Around them, even the gentle hiss of the sprinklers seemed to echo a rhythmic affirmation that patience, composure, and ethical conduct create a stable, balanced environment. In that moment, the man's presence became a living testament to moral courage. He had demonstrated that strength is not measured by volume, entitlement, or the ability to dominate a scene, but by the steadiness of character, the patience to allow evidence to speak, and the willingness to act with integrity under scrutiny. Prejudice and assumptions may ignite conflict, but clarity, calmness, and understanding have the power to resolve it. The neighborhood, once caught in the grip of unnecessary chaos, now hummed with harmony and respect. Through the afternoon light and the fading shadows, the community had learned an enduring lesson. True strength lies in composure, patience, and moral courage, and the respect and understanding of each individual are the pillars that sustain peace. In the quiet aftermath, the man returned to his garage, closing the door not in triumph, but in the steady fulfillment of having lived his values and in doing so, teaching an entire neighborhood the power of integrity.